Serious Europe's migration crisis has become. Paris is to open a reception centre for refugees and migrants to cope with the dozens now arriving there every day. It'll be based here in northern Paris near the railway station and provide 400 men with health checks and advice on claiming asylum. The mayor of Paris says she hopes to prevent migrants from camping in squalid places around the city and ease tensions in concerned neighbourhoods. A camp for women and children will follow by the end of the year. From Paris, Hugh Schofield reports.
It's at this disused railway yard in the north of the city that the main migrant centre will be set up. By the middle of next month, there'll be capacity for 400 migrants. 4 beds per room with electricity, Wi-Fi, proper sanitation and food. Another smaller centre will take in families with children. For the city authorities, the centres are a moral imperative. It's impossible, they say, for things to go on as they are now.
This centre
for refugees is a first in Europe because we are in the heart of a dense city, the heart of Paris. The Centre for Refugees corresponds to our values. We are taking action with a clear mind and without any naivety, but we're acting with humanity, and that is our job.
Humanity means putting an end to the makeshift encampments that keep springing up on the street across Paris. Upsetting for local people, unhealthy and squalid for the migrants. Many of them are shocked and disappointed at what awaits them in the French capital.
I'm feeling like animals like that, just because this is not life for human. When I come from Italy, in my mind I think there is some camp and some good things like that. Some camp and good place for sleeping and clean water, clean life like that, clean toilets, something like that, but there is nothing.
In theory, migrants will spend only a few days at the new centres. They'll be able to clean up, take stock and, if they want, apply for asylum. But some in Paris are worried. A dignified welcome is all well and good, but what if that acts as encouragement for more migrants, who in their turn end up out on the street? Hugh Schofield, BBC News, Paris.
Leonard Doyle is from the International Organisation for Migration. We can speak to him in Geneva. Leonard Doyle, I mean, what do you think when you look at this new scheme in Paris?
Well, I mean, it's not perfect, of course, but it's an improvement because you have this issue of homeless migrants and refugees would be asylum seekers living on the streets of Paris. Many of them quite vulnerable, women, children. It's really not a good situation. So I think what we're seeing is an attempt, a real honest attempt by the authorities of Paris to kind of get their hands around the situation and just essentially try and improve the situation of the migrants.
Do you think this might be just the first of many? Is this going to be the new reality, perhaps for many European major cities?
Well, why not? I mean, you can't have people living through the winter, living rough on the streets. The issue is that the French are taking it very seriously and they want these people to be able to apply for asylum. But of course, as we know, many of them are Anglophone, they're English speakers, they want to go to the UK. For whatever reason, they think their future is in the UK, perhaps with the diaspora. So it's uncertain to the extent to which this will work out as is hoped.
Now, in Hugh's report there was this question of encouragement, perhaps giving people a motivation to travel to Paris and other cities by setting up camps where they have some sort of dignity rather than a squalid life on the streets. I mean, how do you answer that? I mean, I'm not talking about the very most desperate people who are coming, but those who perhaps have some kind of choice in the matter.
Well, I mean, the big issue here is that you've got 9,000 people now living in the Calais area, waiting and hoping to get to the UK. And it is an extraordinarily well-organised setup there in terms of huge amount of NGO aid and efforts, but it's just not solving the problem. And the problem is that you've got people disrupting, if you like, French life. They want them to apply for asylum, they want to process them. And of course, many in the long term will be rejected for asylum because they'll be deemed to be not from a refugee-producing situation. So it's a very tricky issue. The French have been, as welcoming as they can be, and there's a tricky political situation there as well. And all the time respecting the rights of the migrants.
Leonard Doyle, we have to leave it there. Thank you very much indeed, joining us from Geneva from the International Organisation for Migration. Now, from condoning the mass killing of suspected drug pushers to hurling a foul-mouthed insult at the world's most powerful man, the new president of the Philippines is certainly having an impact. But now Rodrigo Duterte says he regrets the comments after his language led to the cancellation of his scheduled meeting with President Obama at the ASEAN summit in Laos. From there, Karishma Vaswani reports.
This is diplomacy, Duterte style. The Philippines President Rodrigo Duterte was due to make his international debut at ASEAN. It's his first foreign trip as a new leader. But the focus shifted to dampening down the controversy he created.
President Duterte explained at the press reports that the President, Obama, would lecture him on extrajudicial killings led to his strong comments, which in turn elicited concern. He regrets that his remarks to the press have caused much controversy.
The Philippines leader has made offensive comments about high-profile people before. He's insulted the U.S. ambassador to his country, the Pope, and now even the U.S. president. He made the offensive remarks after being asked what he would do if Mr. Obama raised the issue of extrajudicial killings with him.
You must be respectful. Do not just throw away questions and statements. Putang ina, mumurahin kita dyan sa forum na yan.
More than 2,000 people have died in raids in the Philippines since Mr. Duterte became president. He's been criticized for the shoot first, ask later policy he's put in place. But Mr. Obama didn't appear to be bothered by the spat, not even publicly acknowledging it in his first formal speech in Vientiane. Instead, he spoke of the U.S.'s long-term commitment to the region.
The United States is more deeply engaged across the Asia-Pacific than we have been in decades. Our position is stronger, and we've sent a clear message that as a Pacific nation, we're here to stay. In good times and bad, you can count on the United States of America.
ASEAN summits tend to be humdrum events, perfectly stage-managed and well-rehearsed. But this year has been different, thanks to the debut of Mr. Duterte. But it's also possibly been a missed opportunity for the Philippines. The two countries had lots to talk about: trade, China, and maritime security. Instead, Mr. Duterte has spent the first day of the summit repairing the damage his comments created. Karishma Vaswani, BBC News, Vientiane.
Well, Rodrigo Duterte certainly isn't the first politician to cause a diplomatic row with an insult. Here's a few more you may have forgotten. Back in 1999, the Syrian government triggered a huge row with the Palestinians after describing their former leader Yasser Arafat as the son of 60,000 whores. Former London Mayor and now British Foreign Secretary Boris Johnson raised eyebrows in 2007 when he described Hillary Clinton's appearance as that of a sadistic nurse. And who could forget this from British politician Nigel Farage?
You have the charisma of a damp rag and the appearance of a low-grade bank clerk.
Well, that was him describing the then European Council President Herman Van Rompuy, on the right of the screen there, one of his many run-ins with the European Council, to say the least. Now, the World Health Organization has updated its advice to people who are returning from parts of the world affected by the Zika outbreak. Under the new guidance aimed at preventing the spread of the virus, individuals are advised to practice safe sex or even abstain from sex for 6 months. The latest advice applies to both men and women. Previous advice was mainly directed at men. The guidance applies to individuals even if they are not displaying Zika-like symptoms, and even to couples who aren't planning to start a family. And it comes with mounting evidence that sexual transmission of the Zika virus is more common than previously thought. Let's talk to Isaac Bogosh, an infectious disease specialist at Toronto General Hospital. He's recently been involved in new Zika research published in the journal The Lancet. In fact, we spoke last week. Isaac Bogosh, welcome back. I mean, first of all, what do you make of this new advice?
Well, basically what the World Health Organization is doing is updating their guidelines based on this evolving pattern of research that's just emerging. So we're learning more and more about the Zika virus every day. We're learning more about how it's transmitted and what the complications are. And there's been a few cases of Zika virus that have been transmitted or have been detected in the semen up to 6 months after infection. So the WHO is taking a very conservative stance here and changing their guidelines to really avoid any sexual transmission of this virus from man to woman and also from woman to man.
Yeah, and it does seem that this sexual transmission risk is becoming a far bigger factor in the warnings that we're hearing.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, by far the primary means of transmission is from mosquitoes, and the real war here is going to be on avoiding mosquito bites and controlling mosquito populations. But as we know, people have sex and lots of it, and we know that this can be a sexually transmitted infection as well. And the real concern here is to ensure that women who are pregnant or who are considering becoming pregnant in the near future not get infected. And the reason is we know that this can have detrimental effects, negative effects on the developing baby. And really what these guidelines do is cast a pretty wide net to protect women who may be pregnant or who may be becoming pregnant soon from getting the infection, and thus preventing any abnormal side effects in the developing child.
So the reason why people who aren't even considering starting a family are being told to abstain is just that wider net you throw of it, the real caution.
Yeah, that's right. And, you know, what they're also saying is, you know, if people aren't considering becoming pregnant, they might be pregnant in the next 6 months or so. And we know that the virus can be transmitted. There's a case of Zika virus that was detected in semen 6 months after infection. And the person who had it was well. He didn't feel unwell. He had no symptoms whatsoever. This was 6 months later, and it was still detected in the semen. So, you know, people often change their minds about whether or not they want to become pregnant. Sometimes they don't even know they want to become pregnant, and they become pregnant as well. And really, this is a protective mechanism to help avoid any complications in pregnancy.
Briefly, if you will, I mean, how close are we to some kind of effective treatment? Is there any progress on that?
Well, right now, most of the efforts are focused on controlling the immediate threat, so controlling mosquito populations. And then farther ahead on the horizon are vaccines. And there's a lot of effort and research and dollars being poured into creating a vaccine. There's several candidate vaccines that are in development, one of which is in what are known as phase 1 human trials. So they're looking to see if it's safe in humans. Cautiously optimistic here, maybe in 2018 something will be available, but there's a ton of research and development on this front because that's a very sustainable and scalable prevention method.
Isaac Bogosh, thank you very much for talking to us there in Toronto. A look at some of the day's other news, and police in Italy have arrested 21 people across Europe on suspicion of smuggling refugees into Germany, Austria and France in a fleet of old cars. They said the suspects charged more than $500 per passenger to ferry migrants north using a network of vehicles registered to fake companies. After the strong showing for pro-democracy candidates in Hong Kong's regional elections, China has given a warning that anyone who promotes independence for the city could be punished. The fledgling pro-democracy movement won enough seats to be able to veto constitutional changes on Hong Kong's Legislative Council. One of Britain's most prominent Islamist preachers has been sentenced to 5.5 years in prison for encouraging support for the Islamic State group. Supporters of Anjem Choudhury shouted Allahu Akbar, or God is great, as the sentence was pronounced. The judge described him as dangerous and calculating. A French woman who became the first person in the world to receive a face transplant that included the nose and mouth has died. A hospital in the northern French city of Amiens said Isabelle Dinois died after a long illness. She was 49. Isabelle Dinois underwent the pioneering 15-hour surgery in 2005 after she was attacked by her pet dog. Despite a growing HIV epidemic in Russia, groups working to prevent the spread of the virus are running into difficulties. So far, the government has classed 4 organisations as foreign agents, a blacklisting for those who receive funding from abroad and are engaged in activity that's deemed to be political. Maxim Malyshev is an activist with the Rilkov Foundation and explains how the group's new status is affecting their work.
Какие-то перевязочные материалы, лейкопластыри, бинты. Это презервативы. Российское правительство не дает денег на такую работу с уязвимыми группами. Мы 3 раза подавались на президентские гранты. Вот. И каждый раз мы получали отказ. Это реально работает. Но продвигаются методы, там, я не знаю, верность, духовность, уроки какого-то секс-просвещения в школе — это плохо, это разврат. Вот. Ну и поэтому она растет. У нас новости. Нас признали иностранными агентами.
Отлично!
Вот, и на каждый вот какой-то материал печатный мы обязаны ставить вот такой вот штамп, да.
И тест на ВИЧ, например. Что нужно?
Иностранный агент, ну какое-то клеймо, да? Вот, ну потому что я себя вот иностранным агентом не считаю, и, собственно говоря, мы тоже не считаем, что мы работаем в интересах там, ну, каких-то иностранных государств там, или не знаю там кого. Нам может грозить штраф. Вот, от 300 до 500 тысяч. Это огромные деньги, и нужно каждый год делать аудит, а это, кстати, тоже деньги. Вот. И получается, что больше будет оттока на административную какую-то работу вместо того, чтобы работать с людьми вот, ну, там, на улицах. Вот. То есть это тоже будет отвлекать какой-то определенный ресурс. Это не работа, это наше призвание, это наша жизнь. И вот, ну, пока это возможно будет делать, ну мы будем это делать. Вот.
The HIV workers blacklisted as foreign agents in Russia. Now, the United States National Hurricane Center says Hurricane Newton has reached Mexico's west coast near a popular tourist destination. The powerful storm made landfall before dawn at the southern tip of the Baja California Peninsula. The centre registered winds of 145 kilometres an hour. Despite its intensity, there were no immediate reports of major damage. Homeowners and businesses took precautions in advance. Many people either left their properties or boarded up the windows. Major highways are still operational. The hurricane is expected to lose strength over the next 24 hours. The theory that women get paid less than men because they're not sufficiently pushy in the workplace isn't true. Well, that's according to a report by London's Cass Business School and the universities of Warwick and Wisconsin. The study compared the details of 4,600 workers across more than 800 employers in Australia, which is thought to be the only country to systematically record whether employees ask for pay rises. But they did find men were 25% more likely to get that pay rise when they compared like-for-like male and female workers.
We managed to use data that we controlled for a lot of factors. So we controlled for their age, we controlled for whether they had children, whether they are married, and the kind of work that they do. And so we had a like-for-like comparison, as you said, and that meant that in a way it's the first time we've been able to do this proper test. So it was surprising. And another myth was blown as well, and that is that women don't ask because they're worried about upsetting their boss or their manager, and that was also not true. But it was true that women were asking but not getting to the extent of men.
Well, joining me now from Washington is Ariane Hegerwisch, a specialist in the gender wage gap from the Institute for Women's Policy Research. Thank you very much for joining us. I mean, so unless it's just Australian women being particularly confident in the workplace, what is going on here? They're still asking for pay rises, but men are getting more.
Yes, this is such an interesting story, and I wish we had the same data in the US. In the US, we're very focused on women being less likely to negotiate for wages, so they may negotiate for other people or for other issues. I think really it's very welcome because, you know, a lot of women don't work in workplaces where you can negotiate in the first place, and negotiation is a very individualized approach. So while I'm not really sure what is going on in Australia or whether we would have the same results here in the United States, I think it will be seen with a lot of interest here.
One of the authors of the report says that they have to accept that they think this is some element of pure discrimination against women.
I fully agree with that. We know that the wage gap is partly due to women and men doing different jobs, but discrimination accounts for a big factor of what it seems to be not moving. And the wage gap in the United States has stayed more or less the same for the last 15 years, even though women are more and more likely to move into more professional jobs and to get higher educational attainment. So we know from individual stories and we know from the statistics that there is some discrimination, but we know surprisingly little of what happens in this black box of companies when they negotiate and set pay.
Now this sorry to interrupt. One thing that did become clear in the report was a very interesting phenomenon with under 40 women. Women who are younger, there doesn't seem to be any discernible pay gap.
Oh, this goes back for a long time. And also in Australia, there's much more part-time work than there is here in the United States. So you get a kind of more of a differentiation between people working full-time who are captured in the study and those who don't work full-time. But we've always had the case that women start out with a lower wage gap and then it grows over time. And in a way, given that women are more educated now than men, younger women specifically, there shouldn't just not be a wage gap. They should be earning more than men, and they're not.
Interesting to talk to you, Ariana Hegovich. Thank you very much speaking to us there from the Institute for Women's Policy Research in Washington.
Thank you.
Now, he's the man who designed one of the world's most coveted supercars, and now he's turned his hand to a vehicle designed to transform life in the developing world. Gordon Murray, who built the McLaren F1, was asked to come up with a small truck that can be built from a flat pack. It's cheap, easy to build, yet tough enough to cope with the conditions across many parts of Africa and Asia. Richard Westcott reports.
It doesn't look like it could tackle some of the worst roads on Earth. On the surface, the Ox could be any other truck until you put it through its paces. This vehicle sort of doesn't make sense when you look at it. It's just an ordinary looking van. It's got these tiny little wheels. It's two-wheel drive, and yet I'm driving it over what could easily be a dry riverbed in Africa. It's really rocky, and frankly it's doing it as well as a 4x4 would do it. In some ways it's actually more comfortable. Believe it or not, the man who designed it also made this. The McLaren F1 is a supercar for the super rich. Ox drivers have very different needs.
Well, when we studied the requirements for where this vehicle is going to end up, there is a requirement for loading livestock. If you hold it there, loading livestock and barrels of fuel and water.
Now, you've designed what some people think is the best sports car ever made. You had all those years in Formula One. How does this rank in terms of how hard it was to design and how proud you are of it?
I know it's probably difficult to believe, but for me, this ranks above everything else I've ever done. Designing expensive sports cars, that reaches a few people. This thing will help. This goes into mass production. This will help thousands of people with mobility.
Was it harder than designing the McLaren F1?
I think in a way this is a much more difficult challenge than the F1 was.
Crucially, it flat packs like furniture, so it's cheaper to transport. 3 semi-skilled people can build it in under 12 hours with basic tools. Every part's designed to be easy to fix. All essential requirements for the man who first dreamt up the plan. For the next step, he now hopes to make 1,000 without making a profit. Richard Westcott, BBC News.
Now finally, Israeli archaeologists believe they've managed to reconstitute the patterns used in tiles that decorated the ancient Jewish Second Temple. This comes after years of sifting through soil that was removed from the site that Jews know as the Temple Mount and Arabs call the Haram al-Sharif. Some 600 bits of stone flooring were unearthed. The archaeologists say they identified 7 potential designs. They believe the 2,000-year-old tile patterns with their stars and squares and other shapes would have adorned the temple's courtyards in the days of King Herod. Back to today for a reminder of our main news. The mayor of Paris says the first refugee camp in the French capital will be opened in mid-October. Anne Hidalgo said the centre, which will have an initial capacity of 400, will only be for men. It'll be followed by a second camp for women and children. There's lots more on the BBC website. If you want to get in touch with us, BBC World News. On Twitter, I'm at Karin BBC. You can also find us on Facebook. But that's it from the programme. The weather's coming next. Me, Karin Giannoni, and the rest of the team, goodbye.